so much been written about the character of Candida as being this sort of like idealized woman and sort of better than everybody else. And she's so more complicated than that, so much more interesting. And so I just wanted to do it to find out really how to kind of take it all apart. You know, it's ostensibly about, you know, two men who vie for the love of one woman, but that's really just from their point of view. You know, that's what they think it is. She hasn't been thinking that at all. So what kind of battle they're in is really not the battle she has been waging her whole life to be to be happy. There's a lot of things that are changing underneath the surface of this relationship over time. And this guy comes in and unearths all that. And all these assumptions that she has had of her husband and her husband has had of her are actually based on old information. And they haven't re-discussed the contract. And all the things that she thinks she's done to keep him happy, all the things he thinks he's done to keep her happy, and neither of them is happy. And it's not until this punk, it was like a combination of like this, of this adorable, shy, neurotic, messed up kid with this extraordinary poetic voice that is also, on top of it, extremely shrewd.
So Shaw married after Candida, and he married a woman who actually was very similar to Candida. It's quite fascinating. They are supposed to have had a relatively sexless marriage, but a very close marriage. Both Christian socialists, both part of the Fabian Society.
And I find him very intriguing, and it's just that idea of, in the scene between us, what am I putting out there? I mean, that's the question.
She has this great speech with her husband, her fake husband, in the play, where she, after he's been, the seed of doubt has been put in it, like Iago Capella, and she talks about how he's just completely enabling everybody to continue to sin so they can get cleansed every Sunday. And then the reason why he's successful is because women want to sleep with him.
But John was so great, and he had this wonderful image of that Candida is drunk. I love that idea, like drunk on ideas. And so she doesn't realize the consequence of what she's saying to her husband.
So she in this attempt at getting him to stop work, she brings him over to the couch and starts talking about how she wonders if he'll have sex with a good woman or a bad woman, and will he be angry at her because she didn't teach it. and then she talks about Eugene's need for love, and there's this great scene between the two of them where he gets a little nervous, and she says, "Am I concerning you?" And he says, "Well, of course not. I have complete faith in you." And your response is, "Why you?"
You vain thing.
Are you so sure of your
attractions, your irresistible attractions? Yes.
He goes, "But I'm not thinking about my irresistible attraction. I'm thinking of your," and he goes, "your goodness and your purity." And you say,
"What a nasty, uncomfortable thing to say to me."
Yeah, I say that I make it to the gate of heaven, but that I couldn't bring myself to go in.
and in case anyone is not clear about this, at the top of the play, Act 3, she has been reading poetry for 2 hours. She is sitting at the fire, mesmerized by a poker. Okay, that's in the play. That's in the play, and she's just looking at the poker, like the first 30, 40 seconds of it, and he's talking to her. He says, "Are you paying attention?" She said, "Yeah, I keep talking about the angel." As she's mesmerized by the poker. And he says, and then she puts down the poker, right? Says, "I'm sorry, I was
hypnotized
by the poker.
By the poker.
Why didn't you tell me to put it down?" And what do you say?
And I said that I wanted to tell you to put it down, but it made me uncomfortable, and I was afraid of making you uncomfortable too.
And then you keep saying,
"It looked as if it were a weapon." Well, then again, this is really broad, but it looked as if it were a weapon. If I were a hero of old, I should have laid my drawn sword between us. If your husband had come in, you should have thought I'd take it.
I mean, come on! I know I'm a Freudian, but I mean, the language itself Julie's like, really? It's so obvious. And I went, I know. How much fun do you get to do on stage? And she goes, what am I thinking about when I think about the poker? And I whispered in her ear. She was like, really? And I said, yeah. And she's written just before Freud. All the post-Freuds, or the same time as Freud, that all the post-Freuds, that just is seeped inside of us. So that's a cliche now. Whereas when it was first invented, it was probably the most thrilling concept. The code of that must have been like, oh my God, I can't believe that's actually happening on stage. Right now you look at it and go, I can't believe that's actually happening. So our job is to reinvest in what that feels like, right? Not make fun of it, because if I make fun of it, then the show would seem even older and more old-fashioned than it deserves to be. He finally comes out with what's been going on, and it's one of the most extraordinarily written scenes for a woman in response. And it was written as a kind of response to Ibsen's A Doll's House, where he was a huge fan of Ibsen, and this is like Ibsen, this is like Shaw visits Ibsen. It's like if Shaw and Ibsen had a child. And the kind of his kind of quoted statement around the play was, what if this was a story about Nora who didn't leave the house, who didn't leave. And when you see A Doll's House, you think this woman leaving this home and breaking through this kind of Victorian, the corset of society or what have you. And it's this grand political act. And it's filled with all this ambiguity and kind of like the unknown. And this is a woman who makes a different kind of decision.
Wow. It's way more complicated than you think when you just read it on the page, I think. Coming to terms with all of that.
You can read Shaw, and it all sounds so good on the surface. Then you start digging underneath and you realize that there's...
And he's so interested, even early in his career and on through his career, in the effect of money and morals. So, how much, what can you afford in your life? Do you afford your morals? Do you afford them through age? And say for these two young characters, is morality different when you're unencumbered by a family, by bills to pay? So particularly the Nick's character, is he able to be idealistic? Because he is unencumbered. He doesn't have anybody to look after except for himself.
And he's rich.
And he's rich.
Yeah. That does sort of help, doesn't it?
Upon first reading it, I did think it was sort of domestic and quaint and small and fun. And it wasn't until I got into rehearsals where I realized that I was really in for a lot more than what I anticipated. And it turned out to be a good thing, but it did surprise me in the first week of rehearsal how much is there to be mined that I didn't realize was there upon, just kind of superficially reading it the first time around.
All of us at the end of the day, we're mining it. You're so specific, in this kind of microcosm. Like, well, why say that in that way? Shaw on the page is such great grammar. Like, and there's something about trying to put that grammar into your mouth with the British accent, wearing a corset. We're like, okay, and now taking that breath, and now talking, And there's something so great, and at the end of the day, we all look so pleased, but kind of in a daze. And I think that is what makes it so fun to work on, is because it feels like you've been to the gym. But like the gym of the heart.
Shaw is like the most magnificent person you'd ever want to have at your dinner party. I've always been thrilled by his work, and I think these people like Ibsen and Shaw, they wrote in small houses, they wrote their plays in these houses, a lot of times. But the ideas are just pushing through these walls. Because they were writing for their period and their time. So they were writing in a completely naturalistic style, but what was going on underneath was just going beyond that. And it just thrills me to have that tension on stage. Shakespeare didn't bother with the house. those things were just all flying out there. You know, but when you got into the 19th century, drama was all very naturalistic and pulled in, but these writers were writing against that stuff. It was only in America over time that it started to get actually smaller and smaller, the writing, to fit inside the house. Then you have people like Miller trying to push out that house again, you know, with All My Sons. He tries to put it in the yard, talking about things that are bigger than what are in that house, that are in the house. And like Clybourne Park, which takes place in a house, is pounding out against the house. And I think the trick in being in an outdoor theater is how to create that sense of density in the house when you're not actually in one, right? But the great thing is if you create this density and then you're out in nature, the stuff you can sing more. That's my hope. So my point, my passion for the play is in trying to get it to sing as big as maybe Shaw might make Shaw proud, even if I totally got the poker wrong.